I remember the Germans came.
The mob was screaming bloody murder. Kill the Jews.
We were hiding in the cellar.
We went downstairs after they left, and there was nothing left. It was all glass on the floors.
We apparently got a letter that said, you have to leave Germany.
The train was full of refugees.
And there were soldiers parading up and down each car all the way through.
They grabbed the teddy bear from me, pulled out a pocket knife, and they slit open the bag.
And the second mail, we got an announcement, a letter that said you've been accepted for a position in the Philippines.
We went to the Philippines because it was the only place that gave us a visa.
We were the last train out of Berlin. They closed the border.
We were able to go to the Philippines and escape that.
There was a family in there, and they had a baby, and the Japanese threw the baby up and caught it with a bayonet.
Then they had all their guns pointed at us down below.
I don't know whether they were burnt or what, but we had to run past all these bodies.
I didn't care if they were Jews. I didn't care if they were Filipinos. I didn't care who they were.
They beat this guy for hour after hour after hour.
Right next to me was a woman who had been bayoneted and was dead with her whole body exposed because she'd been bayoneted. And we lay there for 2 days.
I still have nightmares to this day.
The 1930s were a dark time in Europe. The Nazi Party steadily moving toward the final solution of what they called their Jewish problem. Stormtroopers swept across Germany and Austria, burning synagogues, smashing and looting Jewish businesses, and sending tens of thousands to concentration camps. Ursula Progel was only 5 years old.
We lived in an apartment. I was in the crib still, and the SS came. I guess I was taking a nap. I woke up, and my eye level was their boots, these shiny, shiny boots, and they were ripped open the closet, and I don't know what they were looking for, if they were looking for passports or whatever, but I remember screaming my head off.
Jewish families quit their jobs, packed up their belongings, and fled for their lives. Many, even most, found there was nowhere to go. Nation after nation closed their borders.
European Jewry is really ground to dust between two big millstones. One is the hateful bestiality of Nazi Germany, and the other is the apathy of the governments of the world.
On the other side of the world, however, one nation opened its doors. More than 1,000 people attended a rally in Manila saying that Hitler had violated the inherent right of every man to freedom, life, and the pursuit of happiness. Paul McNutt, the American High Commissioner to the Philippines, called Jewish refugees helpless and persecuted wanderers with no place to lay their heads. Colonel Dwight Eisenhower, working with Douglas MacArthur to build the Filipino military, wrote in his diary, "Hitler's record with the Jews is as black as that of any barbarian of the Dark Ages." And to newly elected President Manuel Quezon, it was not a question of whether his country would help, but why other nations did not.
Other countries perhaps did not think it that important. I don't presume to say. But I know that Dad had the moral courage to do it because he believed in the sanctity of human life and the right of people to live life as they believe they should.
The president of the Philippines knew about what is happening to the Jews in Europe, and he offered them to come to settle in the Philippines.
These offers were powerful documents.
Yeah, they came at night and arrested him, but I got him out because we had papers to leave Germany to go to the Philippines.
One brave woman used a letter promising her husband a job as a cigar maker to pull him out of the infamous Sachsenhausen concentration camp.
I had blonde hair. I looked like a real German, what they called a real German girl, right? And I went there, and I simply had a lot of nerve. I went to the gate and I said I was coming to pick up my husband. Nobody questioned me that, that he was a Jewish guy.
In fact, the Philippines had begun accepting refugees a year earlier when the Nazis had evacuated German citizens from war-torn Shanghai. A group that included 28 German Jews. Waiting at the dock in Manila was Philip Frieder, who had formed a rescue committee only days earlier when he was first alerted to the refugees' arrival. It was an act typical of the Frieders, 5 brothers from Cincinnati who for decades had been leaders of the Jewish community.
In 1918, when they first went to the Orient, I mean, they were really young men going out into a land that no one really knew too well. I think when they first got to the Philippines, there were, I don't know how many Americans were there. I don't think there were 30 Jewish families there.
Athlete, scholar, movie star, they all appreciate a fine cigar. Rich aroma, smoke.
The Frieders had come to the Philippines to buy cigars and stayed to make them. They took turns running the family business, each bringing their wives and children to the Pearl of the Orient for a 2-year tour of duty. While the children swam and played, the adults moved within the glittering social world of the Philippine elite. This nightly parade of dances, receptions, and card games had a serious purpose.
Those were the golden days, right? They could have just hung out and play poker and have a good time and dance the tango. But no, they had something in their hearts. And what was this something? They had a burning desire to do something good. And they all used their personal relationships to work it out.
For years, the Frieder brothers ran Manila's Jewish Rescue Committee, arranging visas, raising funds, and finding jobs and housing for the refugees.
Number one, they were able to. They were in a position where they could talk to the right people. Number two, they saw what was happening, and they knew that somebody had to do something. So they did.
They felt, because they were one of the 50 American Jewish families there, that that was the role everybody had to play if you're lucky enough to be in the Philippines.
U.S. laws blocking immigration were already tight and growing tighter, so a plan was hammered out over multiple games of poker. Games played in the air-conditioned lobby of the Manila Hotel, on the front porch overlooking the Frieders' lush gardens.
We could hear what was going on the porch all the time. We could hear when someone brought food out to them or drinks out to them, but they were playing poker out there.
And at the home of Angel Zervalakis, a Greek-American private investigator.
But this kind of poker, where the Frieder brothers come to, they come out looking like they've smoked a lot of cigars. They sure smell like it, though. And then they're all talking. Yes, somebody's going to be happy. They'll be happy people. I do believe that my dad had a part in this, that helping the Frieder brothers, and he knew what they were doing.
Paul McNutt's monogrammed chips may have been on the table, but according to 12-year-old Olga, the real stakes were life and death. Alex Frieder suggested that the Philippines grant U.S. visas to Jewish refugees. Paul McNutt saw his point and raised the question of whether the Frieders could find them housing, food, and jobs. Dwight Eisenhower stood on the need to thwart the rising power of the Nazis. But perhaps President Quezon showed the highest cards when he said simply, "It's the right thing to do." In the end, a deal made over poker, bourbon, and cigars would mean escape for over 1,300 European Jews.
Most Filipinos are familiar with Schindler's List. And in Japan, the Japanese are also aware that there was a Japanese counterpart to Schindler. Very few Filipinos know that Quezon was in his own way a kind of Schindler.
Saying that the Filipinos would be glad that when the time of need came, their country was willing to extend a hand of welcome, Quezon opened his country and even a portion of Marikina, his private estate, to the desperate refugees.
Marikina Hall was actually property that he had bought that was supposed to be the nest egg for my father. It was going to be the land that would make sure that my father would have a good living after his father was president. This is what he devoted for the place that the refugees could stay in.
Paul McNutt, who had his eyes on the White House, put his political career in jeopardy, demanding visas from a recalcitrant State Department.
In terms of helping Jews, he understood very well intolerance in American life and intolerance in American politics.
And as each Frieder brother came to Manila to run the family business, he also took on the leadership of the rescue committee.
When I came home from school at noontime, we were supposed to pick up my father and come home for lunch. But he was never ready because he was working on the list. The President Quezon had stipulated that he didn't want anybody that would be a burden on the economy. And so the Jewish community had to promise that they would take care of them, which they did.
It would be much simpler to understand, okay, the Frieders somehow put up money and figured out a way to get visas and did it. Or simpler to understand Quezon somehow acting on his own, having this epiphany of helping somebody and, doing it. But the fact that, he is a Catholic and McNutt is a Protestant and the Frieders as Jews come together make it even more rich and interesting and incredible that it happened. So.
The poker players tried to do more, to provide sanctuary for thousands more refugees on the island of Mindanao. But the Japanese bombed Manila only hours after Pearl Harbor. The beginning of years of harsh occupation.
We were there for the Death March when the Americans came through the streets. We were kind of peering out the window. It was horrible. It was just people dragging along the street, marching along with the Japanese guards on either side.
The refugees never lost hope. And in 1944, General MacArthur made good on his promise to return.
I recall very vividly at one time one of the pursuit planes was flying down quite low, and I was on the street in front of my house, and apparently the pilot saw, and he did a 360 and flew back and dropped a Hershey candy bar to me. We split it, like 30 different ways. Everybody got a taste of it. It was great because it was one step closer to liberation, It was a wonderful feeling. Never suspecting what would happen when the actual ground troops invaded. That was never anybody's thoughts.
Most expected the Japanese to withdraw from Manila, making their stand in the remote mountains. Instead, they dug in for a fight to the death.
Then the shocking discovery of orders from the Japanese Supreme Command for the systematic massacre of Manila's citizens and the complete destruction of the city.
You could see Manila burning for a whole week. It was a night where nothing but Manila was a fire, and it was so bright, and it never died for a whole week or so. The fires were just burning and burning and burning, and we were right in the middle of it.
The Battle of Manila lasted for weeks and rivaled any battle in World War II for the number of civilian casualties.
We went through some very hard times there in the Philippines. There was no picnic there. But as you see, we survived.
Manuel Quezon died before his country was liberated, but the link to Jewish freedom was not forgotten. In 1947, the Philippines was the only country in Asia to vote for the partitioning of Palestine, leading to the creation of the State of Israel. After the end of the fighting, the Manila Symphony, which under conductor Herbert Zipper, a refugee from Austria, had refused to perform for the Japanese, played Beethoven in the ruins of a Catholic cathedral. Temple Emil, Manila's only synagogue, had been destroyed, but thousands of Jewish soldiers and refugees were welcomed by Rabbi Joseph Schwartz from Germany and his friend Cantor Joseph Cisner from Poland for Passover in Manila's racetrack, and eventually Rosh Hashanah in the city's baseball stadium.
It was a wonderful experience. It brought to mind at that time that we were really free.
The boy who asked the 4 questions was 10-year-old George Lowenstein from Germany.
What was it like? I mean, when you look over the vastness of all these soldiers in the stands, it's awesome. It's also great seeing the American flag fly again. Except rather than the rising sun, the red ball against a white background. So that was very impressive to see the stars and stripes. Still is impressive.
After the war, the rescue in the Philippines was largely forgotten, as the poker players simply went on with their lives, leaving their actions to the judgment of history.
In that historical moment, they were heroes, but they didn't necessarily see themselves as heroes. It looks like they were just doing the right thing, and they responded to a crisis in the right way, regardless of the fact that it wasn't necessarily great for their careers as a president or as a representative of the military, or even for a career as a cigar maker.
To me, Hitler lost 2 wars. He lost the regular war, and he lost the war against the Jews, because here we are. And what's more, Hitler should only know, we have a Jewish state. We have a homeland.
In a memorial park outside Tel Aviv, the Open Doors Monument stands in mute testimony to the Philippines, a nation that stood firm on the basic principle of shared humanity, battling hatred with the simple weapon of an open heart.